All right. Well, here we go.
Okay.
All right. So I'm Alan Barbie. I'm a graduate student in the Information and Learning Technology School Library program. So this is my last semester. So starting in the fall of 18, I'm going to be working as a teacher librarian. And so, we do a lot of work with technology. Librarian is just a lot more than checking in and out of books. And so there's a lot of co-teaching and stuff that goes on within this position, and then also working closely with the technology folks. And so John and I were at the same school. We'd be working hand in hand together, doing a variety of different things technology-wise with students from a different approach.
That's true. I'm John Foyle. I'm a technology teacher in Cherry Creek Schools. I've been teaching technology for 13 years. I'm also in the ILT program, but I'm doing the ILT for e-learning and getting my K-12 certification to be a technology specialist. My goals are not necessarily get out of the classroom, but at some point I hope to become a district trainer because I'd like to be teaching teachers. I guess that's about the ins and outs of it.
Okay. All right. So we're gonna take a look. We'll have a chat about Do Not Track, which was an interesting set of videos. And I was a bit familiar with a lot of the stuff that goes on. But one thing that caught me off guard, at the end of this was very interesting. It would be in the first. Again, I like documentaries a lot. I used to teach history, and so I always like the reality piece. Is that it was the first interactive documentary that I've seen and had the ability to participate in. So that was kind of an interesting twist about how technology lets you become a participant in the documentary rather than just from somebody standing back with a camera or doing an interview or some type of film that goes along with that. So anyway, that was kind of like an interesting piece that's kind of stuck out, towards the end, of this series.
Well, and at the end, they shared with you what information they were able to glean from what you were willing to share, and say, "This is what we've learned about you from the information you were able to share with us." And most of what they shared with me was spot on with who I am. And
Yeah.
I found that a little disconcerting considering how little I was willing to share. Because I'm a little bit of a paranoid when it comes to online stuff. And I think maybe that might be misguided because you're not going to avoid it.
Yeah, I think, it really pointed out, the new reality is that if you're going to be online, there is at least in the United States, I think European has some stronger controls, but still there's no right to really privacy. Once you put stuff out there, it's out there forever. And you don't really have a lot of control or, option about that. They kind of brought that out in the first video where they talked about, cookies. And so if you're going to use this website, then, you have to allow the cookies. And if you don't use the cookies, then you don't get to use the website. So then you're making a decision, do I want to use this piece of technology or not? And so in certain ways, it's your choice. But in reality, if you're doing certain things, do you really have a choice? Or the choices have very high cost. Well, okay, I'm not going to use technology. That's part of my choice. But how could I complete a program, or how could I complete an assignment, or how could I do something else? So in certain ways, you kind of get arm wrestled into, giving up this data, this information, and there's no really control of who you can allow to see it, who you can. It make it very challenging to do so.
I know that when we were discussing doing this, one of the things that I was the most amused by was Do Not Track expected them to be able to track you. So we're the Do Not Track people, but we're going to track you.
Yeah, exactly.
That irony was not lost on me. But I honestly had no idea about the depth that they go to in order to gather information about you. When they get into your actual configuration of your computer, and then what browser you use and where you're located, and then what kinds of topics you kind of go to, and they look for these patterns, and then they know it's you. It's like a fingerprint sort of, except I guess it's a behavior footprint. And
yeah,
that's a little disconcerting to me that they have developed this what do they call it? Oh my gosh, don't you hate it when a word just pops right out of your head?
Yeah.
The protocol that they use to analyze what you're doing.
Yeah, so when they use they have behavioral algorithms.
Algorithm, that's the word.
And so, going through that process, Yeah, it is amazing how far we have come and how much technology and being able to write programs and process data and collect data has transpired, even in the last maybe 10 years. So there's been a huge growth, and it almost feels like there's exponential growth. So I wonder what it's going to look like 10 years from now in 2028 and what's going on. We probably wouldn't even recognize it, or the amount of knowledge that is out there about us would probably be very startling if we were to, discover that. I'm sure we would today, but even to a much greater degree. More of the technology invades our purview and our lives, continued reliance and increased reliance on smartphones, and just the things that businesses are going to, because I'm in the market for a new smartphone now because I need something with a little more memory. And so I've been hearing about with my smartphone, I can turn off the GPS tracker because I turn off the Wi-Fi, the GPS tracker, and the Bluetooth. I only turn them on when I'm going to use it. And they're saying that the new model phones, you are not able to turn off the GPS. So they will know where you're at all the time, and you have no control over that. And for me, that's quite bothersome. And so then I'm like, well, maybe I'm just going to go back to an old punch flip phone, and then willing to give some of that up because, what does that look like from, just the knowledge that somebody's out there tracking? Because when I was teaching American government, I taught my kids Animal Farm in 1984. And, 1984 was like very far in front in my brain. And we talk about, what that looks like and the things that, they were writing about in 1940, 47, 48, 49. It's basically true today. We have the screen. The only thing we're not doing is we're not getting up and doing exercises. We have revisionist history going on. It's not as, prevalent as it is in there. But we are not very far off. If you talk about degrees of separation, I feel like we are 1 degree of separation from a 1984 world.
Well, and after listening to what they said in this Do Not Track, it sounds like we could be even closer than that, and we would know it because the algorithm is dictating what it is that we're going to be seeing as far as news goes. And unless we've indicated that that's what we want to hear about, we're not hearing about it.
Yeah. And so that
frightening, isn't it?
It is because, I understand where they come from before, where we talk about in this last articles that we've read, and it ties into this about, a digital citizenship and, there's greater equality because, people can produce media and things like that couldn't before, so it didn't get filtered through somebody else's lens.
Right.
But the problem now is that anybody can produce media and put stuff out there and people believe it. And then if you go to it, even if it's bogus like The Onion, and then all of a sudden you're getting other news stories like that, you're in that echo chamber, and how do you believe or how do you know anything to be true? Where at least if it had come through some of those other sources, even though that it was maybe a liberal or conservative slant, you knew that and it had been filtered through that lens, as opposed to, well, here's what's going on, and maybe you're not necessarily aware of that by going to Vox and The Guardian and some of these others, that you're going to get leftist media and you're not going to get the other views. And how many people among us actually like to go out and go, okay, well, I'm going to read the National Review, and then I'm going to read The Guardian, and then I'm going to read Al Jazeera, and then between the three of those, I'm going to kind of piece together as like kind of really what is going on, or how can I, filter some of all those biases to figure out really what the true situation is. And so that is being eroded with this. And then so ultimately, what does that mean for an educated citizenry to make political decisions?
I think it's the Onion. You mentioned The Onion, and I mean, come on, that's such a satire. The way they twist things and make things, they're just ridiculous. What about the people who read that and don't realize that they're being satiristic? And, oh my gosh, the aliens! It's like The Inquirer.
What's scary about that is that that happens. I have a friend of mine that. I don't know. He's about 15 years younger than myself. And when he was going to school and he was working on his business degree, some kid come in and talked about this new invention from Apple. It was a keyboard and it was just a big circle and you just twist it to get the letters. And he was talking about how this was like the greatest thing. And it was from The Onion. He's like, that was total made up. And he's in there presenting this class like, hey, this is the next greatest thing in technology. And they're like, dude, I read that. That whole site is a spoof. They make fun of stuff. And he thought it was a legit website with real technology media. It happened in a college class. This was 10 years ago. And I was amazed. I was starting to pull some lessons and use stuff from like some of the Onions and some of those others with kids and go, hey, dude, let's check this out. Let's see what's going on in the media. And see if they find it like, dude, is that real? You know, at least question them, or do they actually believe that and go like, oh yeah. And then, you know, pick up that vein and run with it.
Well, you know, and maybe it wasn't Do Not Track. It was actually the video we watched for this week where the guy was talking about Wikipedia.
Oh yeah.
And I remember that when Wikipedia first started really to get going, people kept saying, oh, that's not a reliable source, don't use it. And now when I look at it, or even then when I looked at it, it's like, but it's a perfect springboard. It's a perfect place to start. Don't use it as a final answer, but it's a wonderful place to get some vocabulary, some search terms. I mean, a Boolean search with some good terminology will get you some really great results if you get into the right database. But I mean, Wikipedia can be basically edited by anybody, but now that they're vetting it so well, but who's vetting it? Is it an algorithm or is it people?
It's a good question.
Wow, I didn't expect that to tie together like that, but man.
Yeah, no, it's interesting about how they had that conversation. And, you know, a lot of people are really down on it. But, you know, I tell my students, I start there. If I don't know something, I'll go look at Wikipedia. I'll start looking at the bottom at the sources, and then I'll start going looking for more scholarly work. You know, just like here, just give me some basic background. You know, I know you have to be careful in looking at it, but sometimes you get some good ideas, or you come across a really good source from the links at the bottom, and then therefore you get into something that's much more scholarly that you can, you know, has a greater reliability, and maybe it's not as been as filtered, you know, as what it would be in other places. And so it's an interesting conversation about that piece, and you know, who is vetting it and how. And you know, I think these questions have been around for quite a while, but I think they've become even more prevalent and more important in the society that we're living in today and moving forward, where anybody is a publisher of media now,
right?
And not just the big boys, and anybody can write anything, and whether it's believable or not. I was going to build a fake website with a friend of mine when I was, you know, in the library when I'm teaching sources and about a history website. You know, my buddy was all over this, and we're like, oh, we could talk about the Dark Ages and how it was like physically dark because there was a big volcano covered up the sky. And so for hundreds of years, people lived with the dark and they didn't need sunglasses. And then just see how many kids you got to buy into and go, hey, look, you know, this is out there. And when we consume media in this way, you have to be very careful, very skeptical, and really examine the sources and where it comes from with a critical eye, because it's really easy to, you know, get misdirected. And that's what companies are out there to do. They're out there to make money, and however they make money, you know, and that's ultimately their goal, and they're going to do whatever it takes.
Well, and they, in the Do Not Track, it talked about how, what were the 4 companies, Google and Facebook and Amazon and something else?
Yes.
These cookies that they allow to be placed, and all of this data they allow to mine, and then they're selling it to people, and that's like a big source of income, a big resource for them. And so what's the purpose behind gathering the data? Well, for them, it's a source of revenue.
Yeah, it's making money.
And the article where the guy talked about how he liked everything for 2 full days, except for the guy who's had a family member die, and he just couldn't like that. I mean, which I understand that.
Yeah, I get that.
But I never did quite understand what he said happened after that. I guess he started getting a whole lot of things in his feed that were just bizarre. But I'm like, I wonder what that would really do. If it's people you're following anyway, they're your friends.
Yeah, you know, that would be an interesting experience, or an interesting experiment to do yourself, to see, you know, if you were to go on and like in a certain vein, to see what type of news feeds, and then that's maybe you check something else out and like something totally different to see what it looked like, and you could do your own little Morgan Spurlock supersize me, except for McDonald's, you could do it with big media over the course of a couple weeks, and then see how that dynamic changed. But there was an interesting point that they brought up that I hadn't thought about too much, is that, you know, we as Americans, we don't like to pay for things, but we like services. And so they made that really important distinction in the second or third video about we pay with data because we don't like to pay for stuff on the web with money.
Right.
And so if you were to pay with money, you wouldn't have this problem. But since you're not willing to pay with money, you're going to pay with giving up your data, which ultimately is going to generate, you know, money. And so for businesses in order to basically pay for the hosting services and the technologies that support it. I mean, I get it. I've been in business before. You can't run things for free. Otherwise, you don't stay in business. You got to make some money somewhere.
Right.
But it's interesting about that trade-off. And at the time, I don't think people, even of a lot of us now, you don't foresee all this other stuff that happens on the back end to really know where this is going to go. The rules are being made up as we're going along. And
right.
So how do you know until you've had that experience? And then with the current state of government, there's very little in the way of consumer protection. And so, this is just what you're going to end up with. Europe is a little different story. They tend to have tighter regulations with that.
Well, and I kind of feel like it's not even that they're making the rules up as they go along. I think they're trying to get away with as much as they can before the rules restrict them.
If they get restricted.
Yes.
That's the problem, is that as they try to restrict and do stuff like that, it gets necked down.
Yeah, we live in the world of that, don't we?
Yeah, unfortunately so.
Watching them talk about with the cell phones, coming back to that, when they talked about how the GPS and it basically tracked every move you made, and it occurred to me how many times I've been sitting at my desk the day after I went out to dinner with my wife, and I get a thing that pops up from Google Maps that says, "Hey, how did you enjoy that restaurant you were at last night?" And I'm like, "Oh, hey, yeah, I should talk about that." And I go into Yelp or whatever it is, or Google Maps or whatever it is that is rating it, and I give my rating and I give my statement about how great it was. And then after watching that video last night, I was like, "Oh my God, I didn't tell them I was there. I don't think I took my phone out the whole time I was out." So they literally were watching where I was. This algorithm, whatever it was, picked right up on that and said, "This is where he was. Let's find out what he thought of it." It's kind of freaking me out a little bit.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I know when I forget to turn off my location finder, because I'll be out and I go, "Oh, hey, how did you like XYZ?" Or, "Hey, would you like to add a photo, of whatever else you were doing?"
Right.
And then I was like, "Oh, okay." It just weirds me out when it comes to that. Even though that we're savvy about that, thinking about, okay, I'm giving this data out and I'm conscious of it. I always think of, well, why am I doing this, or should I be this, or how can I be more less, let's say, obvious or conspicuous on the internet. And then ultimately, why would I? Is it really going to matter in the long run? All the
Right.
stuff that I do, the way that society has moved along and technology is advanced, and I have all this information out there about me anyway. You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
No.
So then I'm thinking about, okay, well, is it ultimately really going to matter? And so, I mean, I don't know. I think it's something that I kind of struggle with from time to time about, maybe I should just go ahead and not care and not worry about it, because, I've already shared a bunch of data anyway, up until, recently, the last couple of years, when I've really started to pay close attention to this.
Well, and I don't think that I've paid quite close enough attention to it. That's like going to Do Not Track. I tried to open that up in Firefox, and I have my restrictions set so tight on that I couldn't open it. There are all these websites I can't get to. So I use Chrome for a lot of stuff, because then I can get into these sites and see these things. And I was thinking, wow, I set Firefox up like that on purpose, because that's where I do all my banking.
Yeah.
And I don't want anybody to be able to see what I'm doing when I'm banking. And I started thinking about, I don't think I've written a check and mailed a bill in 10 years, 12 years.
Yeah.
It's all been through my bank. Or holy moly, my car, you plug the little thing into the receptacle underneath the dashboard, and then they track how many times you hit the brake and how fast you accelerate, and all those different accelerometer things that your car actually registers when you're driving. And then it sends it to your insurance company so they can say, "Oh, we need to jack his rates up. He drives too fast," or he's doing too many quick stops, or his trips are all too short. He should be taking some longer trips. So all those miles are within 5 miles of his house. And that's where most accidents take place.
Yeah, that's true.
And okay, I thought I was going to get an insurance break. I didn't realize that Big Brother was going to be checking in on me and making sure that I was being a good boy. I don't want them doing that.
Yeah,
we went to that bar a couple times last week. What's going on?
it's pretty frightening, with those pieces. the company that my wife works for, they track all their trucks, and she'll come home and she'll talk about like, oh yeah, hey, they got on the brakes too hard a couple times, and they were driving 10 miles over the speed limit, blah blah blah, and it
Right.
records all this data that comes back. And I'm ask her, do the drivers know this that's going on? And so it was it was very interesting and frightening about especially coming up, having Bluetooth in your car, people being able to hack into your Bluetooth and take over your car.
Right.
And it was the same thing. There was a really important Supreme Court case that I don't think has been ruled on yet. It was Carpenter v. U.S., and it had tremendous implications for not only First Amendment rights but Fourth Amendment rights for search and seizure. So I don't know if you've heard this or not, but I think it was what was his name? John Carpenter, Aaron Carpenter, something like that. Well, he was a criminal. He went around and robbed banks and stuff like that. But basically, what happened is that he had something that they were tracking him and pinpointing him using his cell phone to point out, like, okay, this bank got robbed, and on your phone shows you were at that location, at that date, at that time, blah 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 blah. And so then there was an issue that come up with Fourth Amendment, which was search and seizure rights. But they said the chilling effect that most people don't realize, and the judges will have to think about that, is that depending on how that case is ruled, that could affect freedom of speech, because then people could figure out, oh, so you were at this political rally. Oh, you were an investigative journalist and you met somebody at this place and blah, blah, blah. And this could be one of your sources. And they were talking about, it is very frightening about this rules have not been written yet about what the Supreme Court ultimately decides, and then where does that go, and then how much more power is the government going to have to figure out whistleblowers and dissenters and all this other stuff. And they said that would have a very chilling effect on people talking to journalists, because they wouldn't have anonymity when they talk about their sources. They could figure out who their unnamed sources were
just by where their phone was at the time.
Yeah, and partly through that. And they said most people don't realize why this is such an important Supreme Court case. And I checked on that a while back, but the Supreme Court hasn't ruled on it yet, because I was really interested to see, and then what the analysis was after that, about, okay, what does that mean for First and Fourth Amendment issues?
Well, my wife was telling me actually that she read in The Week, which is a weekly magazine.
Yep, yeah.
And she said that in China, they're having something that's kind of like a FICO score, except it has to do with what friends you hang around with, what kind of education you have, what you're doing when you're on the internet, when you can get access to the internet, where you're going. And the higher the score, the more opportunities you have. Like if you're hanging around with these guys, they're kind of seedy characters, so that's going to lower your score. So you can't get into this college, or you can't go to that school, or you can't live in this part of town. But you hang out with those guys, and they're good guys, and they do great things, and they're really working hard. So you're working hard too, so you get a higher score. So now you have a chance to go to college. You have a chance to do this, open a business and get a loan to pursue this wealth. But if you're associating with the wrong guys, your score goes down. I was like, whoa.
It's interesting because they brought that. That's a good point that you bring up, because they talked about that. Lemdo, social network scores to access loans. I wrote that down in my little note sheet over there about, hey, we're going to check out who your friends are on Facebook, and we're going to use part of that to determine if we're going to lend you money, and then how much money we're going to lend you, and then how much interest you're going to charge you based on the risk of your friends and stuff like that.
Right.
I thought that is insane.
Well,
I would never agree to that.
He did say at the end of that the idea was more for people who didn't have a credit history.
Yeah.
That by looking at those things and seeing what they're up to, that then they could extend credit to more people. And as I was listening, I was like, yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah, just like there's a lot of that stuff. Oh no, this is we're going to use this for this benefit. You know that it will be morphed out for bad as well, or they will factor stuff in. It's the same thing as that. They say that let's say you go and you declare bankruptcy. 7 years later, that comes off your record. And then blah blah blah.
Sort of. Yeah.
I have a friend of mine that's a bank officer. He's like a vice president of a bank, and he said, "Yeah, Alan, don't believe that. You got a bankruptcy. They don't care. We don't care about the 7-year rule. That's what they tell you. But you will never get credit, or you are going to pay a lot more, irregardless. Even if it's 20 years later, you got a bankruptcy on your record." And I go, that's what they say, but this is how it works in the banking world.
Right. Well, all those like TransUnion and Experian and those credit reports that they all talk about, it may drop off of there. But there are other credit reports that the public doesn't see. My wife
Yeah.
was in mortgages when she was working, and she said that there's, even for mortgages, there's a 10-year record that they look at. It's not even the 7-year thing, and that's only one thing that they were looking at that was 10 years. I bet you there are things you can see for forever.
Yeah.
That's, well, and there are people who are apparently having troubles getting loans because their parents defaulted on school loans, and now
Oh,
they're trying to go to school,
I
and they're
haven't heard
saying,
this.
your parents defaulted on the loan, so we're not going to give you a student loan.
It doesn't. Yeah, it's amazing. It does in society. That stuff sticks with you forever. And this was an interesting piece that I didn't know about, and I forget what it comes up. This guy was talking about, how he defaulted on his school loans, he couldn't pay them back, blah 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 blah. And he wasn't directly encouraging people to default on their loans, but he was like, if you happen to default on your loans, here's how you could do that to minimize the impact. Except when you retire and you go to draw Social Security, if you have student loans, they will automatically deduct that from your Social Security, and there's nothing you can do about it. So he's like, that's fine. So you default on your school loans when you're 25 or 30 years old or whenever. When you go draw on Social Security, you never pay it back. They're just going to take it off your check until it's paid for.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you. Was it like, is there a bulk amount? They just chop it off the top, or is it, oh, you owe 20 grand, so you're going to get $1,000 a month, so we'll see you in 2 years?
Yeah, no, from what they were saying is that they just take it like a payment. Like, okay, rather than getting $1,000 a month, you're going to get $800 a month until you pay back your student loan.
I'm actually kind of glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Because, when you follow the rules and you do what you're supposed to do, and you buy a house and you got a big payment and you're paying off your credit cards and you're going through things step by step and doing what you're supposed to do. And then your friend declares bankruptcy, and now their $2,000 house payment is suddenly $800, and all the rest of the debt they owed is gone. Magically, it's gone. And you're like, well, damn it. I've been working really hard. How come they get this break and I don't when I'm following the rules? Well, yeah. They'll never get another car loan. They'll never get another home loan, at least not at the 3% I can get one for.
Yeah, it's one of those pieces. And it's interesting about how this technology stuff is all tied in together, and it's only going to get more pervasive as time goes by. Right now it's just, it's just an option for, people that don't have credit to get loans. Well, I didn't have credit when I first started. When you first go to college, like, oh, here's a credit card, and you sign up for it, and you start building credit. Right. There was none of that goes on. It was like, I got all kinds of this. Citibank and everybody else said, hey, why don't you apply for a credit card? Here's a $500 limit, and we'll just see how it goes. And a lot of college kids started that way.
Right.
And then if you could manage the $500, then that's like, okay, you've been paying your bill for the last year, so we're going to bump it to $1,500, and you slowly start building your way up. So,
right.
Part of that, I don't necessarily buy that argument. It's like, okay, it's for people that don't have loans. Well, people have been making loans for a long time.
Right.
And they've been extending credit for long periods of time. For me, that was 30 years ago when I was an undergrad the first go around. So I don't buy that song and dance that they're selling about that piece.
Well, that's what they're doing, is they're selling it. Yeah. They're going to tell you what you want to hear, or if you're a person who's trying to establish yourself, they're going to tell you what you want to hear to encourage you to use the service. So then it gets a little bit more of a foothold, and then the next person does it, and the next person does it. And before you know it, we're all walking around with our tracking devices, waiting for the world to figure out where we are. And the frog in the boiling water, here I am.
yeah, pretty much. That's a great way to think about it.
I think we've been talking for at least half an hour.
Has it been that? Wow, time flies.
Well, it's 8:50. It's been at least 20 minutes. We started.
Yeah, I set my timer and I got about 28 minutes. So let's just go ahead and stop it, and then we'll just have a little sidebar conversation before shutting down for the night.
Okay. Well, let me find the place to stop recording here. There it is.